Think of the typical movie western. The Wild West with its gunfighting and barren plains. Cold, hard men who speak little but express themselves more through violence than any utterance of verbal speech. The 40s well into the 70s. John Wayne. Lee Van Cleef. Traditional American values. And Clint Eastwood. No other actor around has been so associated with a particular genre than Clint Eastwood, with the exception of maybe the aforementioned John Wayne. The Dollars trilogy with that famed Ennio Morricone score. His best picture when Unforgiven. Eastwood is the guy when it comes to the western genre. So why is it that one of Eastwood's best is often forgotten when it comes to discussion? High Plains Drifter is my favourite of Clint Eastwood's films as a director. No, I have not yet watched Unforgiven, but I intend on doing so soon. Until then, High Plains Drifter has that top spot. It's a deeply anti-establishment film, marking Clint Eastwood as a notable filmmaker within the New Hollywood movement. Rather than the traditional morality tale the genre often fixated upon, this takes the skepticism of the late 1960s and 70s and transposes the more modern perspective of the era onto the golden age of westerns, much to the chagrin of one John Wayne, who notoriously despised the film. It's about an unnamed man who turns up in a town where the past sheriff had been murdered. Following in the footsteps of the Dollars trilogy, Eastwood plays the man with no name type character synonymous with his tenure in the genre. There's something a little off about the character. He isn't just a man with no name, a drifter with nowhere in particular to go. Something persists in the foreground of this motion picture that, albeit not directly addressed as such, emerges to be the film's greatest strength. I believe High Plains Drifter to be one of the great American Southern Gothic films. The first layer of this examination highlights the Gothic nature of this tale. Take any of the Universal classic monster stories and you get a solid enough first look at the Gothic. These films, many of which based upon the major works of Gothic literature, feature many of the common conventions of the subgenre. They are typically in conjunction with the horror genre, featuring monsterization on a literal scale in order to hyperbolize the fears of the time. The Invisible Man and Frankenstein portray societal fear of the potential that science holds. Dracula is a symbol for the mysterious foreigner. The second element is that of large, oppressive landscapes. Unlike the horror movies of the 30s through to the 50s, which had been popularized after adapting some of the great Gothic texts, the setting of High Plains Drifter is not a brooding, dark castle. Instead, it's an empty expanse of Arizona and desert. Then come the Southern Gothic elements. Unlike the traditional concepts of the Gothic, the Southern Gothic is an exploration of the macabre embedded in the historic roots of the American South, such as violence as a result of racism or misogyny. A recent example of the Southern Gothic is Ryan Coogler's Sinners. Sinners, as well as being a horror tale involving vampires and an action movie, is, front and center, a story about racial identity within Mississippi, the birthplace of blues music. The violence that ensues when attempting to keep it intact. Is it better to assimilate into a culture which is similar to the prevalent racial ideals, or is it better to stay true to one's own heritage, be vampirized by Remick, or put up a fight? The conflicts within Sinners are far too complex to simply dissect as an aside in another discussion. The film even ends with an explosive takedown of KKK in a pretty sweetly cathartic action sequence. It is, very much, an example of a Southern Gothic text. Now, let's apply that to High Plains Drifter. I know that the film takes place in the American West, specifically a fictional town in Arizona, but it ties to subgenre conventions, so I'm willing to ignore the factor of specific geography in my discussion. If the film's spatial setting was simply dropped elsewhere, say, in the American South, many of the same points can be made and strengthened, so I'm willing to condone a brief oversight. This may invalidate that portion of my perspective, but I think it serves the function of making more potent the rot which High Plains Drifter aims to depict. The way I see it, Eastwood's Drifter is the ghost of the town's former sheriff. I know this reading has been debunked by the man himself, who, instead, has stated that the protagonist is instead the sheriff's brother, seeking revenge. According to Eastwood, the fact that the stranger is the sheriff's brother is very well established within the original script and, thus, he played it as such. But, fuck it, death of the author and all that in mind, I think my perception of the movie is significantly richer thematically and makes for a cooler, more engaging story. Thankfully, Eastwood added layers of mystery into the film's director, such as presenting the Drifter as an avenging angel, which which allows for such a range of interpretations. As presented on screen, this reading is validated. You see, there is one unexplainable factor within the narrative. The unnamed drifter has visions, and, within these visions, he witnesses the death of the town's sheriff. If he were the sheriff's brother, as Eastwood so suggests, how would he have such a visceral recollection of the events that took place? None of the onlookers or victimizers have passed on since then. The only real explanation that I'm willing to entertain: Eastwood is playing the spirit of that sheriff, unable to move on from the corporeal world and, thus, pursuing vengeance against those who wronged him. If you subscribe to the belief that the stranger is the sheriff's brother, I guess this could be read as him imagining what would have happened to his brother. But I don't believe it is shot like a dream sequence. By transposing the old sheriff on top of Eastwood's drifter, it is heavily connoted, I think, that the two are one and the same. So, what's the point of this? Why is this ghost-like entity such an interesting character in the grand scheme of the American Western? He is a horrible person. Many westerns focus on the bravery, the ideals that the outlaws hold. They might break the law to rob banks or kill people, but it's badass. It's cool. These characters are designed to be watched with awe. In some instances, they'll even protect a town from incoming bandits. Cowboys and outlaws are awesome. The coolest. The best. The drifter is not one of those men. He is cruel, and he is vindictive. In this fable, as Eastwood himself has referred to it, the violence is subjected to scrutiny. One example of characterization which really stuck with me after watching High Plains Drifter for the first time is that he is a rapist. I doubt I should go at length about it in a YouTube video, but I find it to be a crucial element of the character. Don't try and take this the wrong way. This is not an endorsement. Quite the opposite. The drifter is not a good guy. He may be the film's protagonist, but that doesn't mean he's the good guy. Yes, we follow his perspective, but it is, referring back to my take on the film, a horror film. The drifter is a prime example of horror imagery in the film. As I mentioned earlier, one of the key conventions of the Southern Gothic is the violence in tandem with disparities surrounding race and sex, and the condemnation of the South's past. The way that, for the drifter, it is such a simple task, going so far as to joke about it in later scenes, makes it all the more horrifying to watch and follows character throughout the narrative. So, if the drifter is, in fact, the sheriff who has been characterized as being a moral and upstanding citizen, why this shift in character? I find that it is a reflection of the moral degradation that is not discussed when conversing about the American West. The Wild West is an apt description of the era. Laws were abandoned and people were, to be extremely frank, monsters. So what happens in High Plains Drifter? The one good man in the town comes back as the ultimate monster, a killer, a rapist. He returns changed for the worse as a hyperbolic distillation of what the era of gunslinging cowboys was truly like. Thus, as a result of the self-casting of a figure like Clint Eastwood, one so integral to the genre's image, creates a metatextual element to High Plains Drifter, which causes it to be in constant communication with the actor's past roles. With what is his most famous role as the man with no name, more so an archetype than a full character in its own right, I will acknowledge, Joe from A Fistful of Dollars, Manco from A Few Dollars More, and Blondie from The Good, the Bad and the Ugly are three different people melded into one in the public consciousness. Clint Eastwood became the much recognizable face of the Western genre in the 1960s. And so, within the mythology and legacy of the American West, comes its deconstruction, wearing the face of the symbol. The righteous cowboy of Eastwood films prior is made into a villain here being a character archetype, and not the function served in the actual film. The drifter is very much the film's protagonist still, but calling him a hero seems wrong, and an anti-hero, although he certainly qualifies, contains with it connotations of badassery, which lacks in this horrific characterization. The West is not something to be romanticized, and High Plains Drifter examines the societal want to believe in binaries between the good and evil by forcing the viewer to watch as Eastwood subverts his heroic persona to infernal levels. John Wayne's criticisms about the lack of enthusiasm for the pioneers of the time aside, Eastwood's intent is most clearly to confront audiences with the passive corruption of the everyday people, their ableism, their racism, and their misogyny, and the so-called heroic figures who themselves are indicative of a great human evil. That is High Plains Drifter, an oft-forgotten staple of the Western genre, the strongest, strangest fable of its generation, which subverted the conventions of the genre to provide something truly exceptional. For more discussions like this one, may I ask that you like, comment and subscribe. I strive for one of these deep divey videos monthly, and I cover the latest releases with brief movie reviews, anywhere between 1 to 3 per given week. Here's a tease for the next essay video and, after that, a film recommendation. Let the Corpses Tan by Belgian husband and wife duo Bruno Forzani and Alain Catet is the boldest western in recent memory. The western genre is one that, after a relatively short period of oversaturation, needs reinvention to be exciting. High Plains Drift was that for the new Hollywood era, and Let the Corpses Tan is certainly a modern take on the genre without stepping into the hypermodernity of No Country for Old Men, or especially Eddington, both of which are also undoubtedly great movies. The simple concept of Let the Corpses Tan follows a gang of outlaws after the presence of police in their territory causes rifts in their ranks, permeating through one drawn-out gunfight. There's a melange of inspirations, from classical westerns to giallos and anime, which makes the film the visceral and energetic action film that it is. It engages in surrealism, breaking away from a strict realism to more follow the stylings and editing rhythm, oh so fluid and swift, of the works of Satoshi Kon, the director of Paprika, the best animated film of all time. Give it a shot. More so than even High Plains Drifter, this is an under-the-radar western. Well, that's all. Keep on watching movies and form your own opinions. See you in the next one.